Having recently seen some of the world events taking place, some of us may have had at some point on our mind the second coming of Christ, and that we look forward to that day. We, of course, look to be among the wheat, the sheep, the good fish that receive life into his kingdom. And from that day forward, we are forever with the Lord. But we're also told that we don't know when that day will occur. Not only us, but Jesus Christ himself, interestingly, also does not know of when that day will occur, only the Father. An indication that God is still in some way separate from Christ, or maybe at least is able to restrict some knowledge to just himself. However, we are told in what manner he will return, and it is this area that I want to focus on today, because I think there is a distinction in Scripture about how Jesus Christ will return to when it comes to his faithful followers versus those who are not. Those who are in the world, as we might say, versus those who are his chosen people, those who obey him. Specifically, I'd like us to focus on 1 Thessalonians, as there is a description here of how to expect his return. This passage, along with a couple of others, we'll use to understand the difference, if there is one, in his return to those that seek and obey him now versus those that do not, or at least those who choose not to. So let's start by having a look at 1 Thessalonians 5. Paul explains to the Thessalonians in the latter half of chapter 4 that Christ will descend from heaven and raise first those that have died. As time was going along, some of the brethren began to die, and so apparently there were some who started to think, well, what about these people? If Jesus Christ is going to return and save us from this world and bring us into his kingdom, have these people who have already died, have they missed it? Are they going to be left out? So in the context here, Paul is making sure they understand that these people will be raised, even taking precedence over those who would be currently alive. Then we come to chapter 5, where he describes the manner in which Jesus will return. So 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 1. And by the way, I'll be reading all scriptures from the ESV translation. Now concerning the times and seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. Though the Thessalonians apparently already well knew this, Paul decides to tell them again. Something interesting here is the Greek words for are fully aware, or if you're reading New King James, it'll say know perfectly, are an adverb, which is the word for perfectly, and a verb, the word for know, that when used together signify precisely or accurately. So Paul is saying that they knew this precisely, though he decides to remind them again. He says that the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. What does he mean by this? This is our focus for today. So let's continue verse 4. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. There might appear to be a bit of a backpedaling on Paul's part. In verse 4, he tells us that Christ will return as a thief in the night. But then in verse 5, he says, you are not in the darkness, that day will surprise you like a thief. So is Jesus coming like a thief in the night or not? To really answer this, we must understand the imagery that is used here, specifically thief, night and day, and being awake versus being asleep. These are all used as imagery to explain a bigger, more detailed picture, and it also tells us about how to understand his return. We'll start with the imagery of night versus day and being awake versus asleep, since they're similar. Keep your place here, but let's flip over to Luke 12. We'll come back to 1 Thessalonians, so if you maybe just want to put a finger or something there. I normally use a Cheeto or like a Cheez-It, just your common average church snack. That way when you flip back, you're like, hey, a snack, perfect. But it's up to you. So in Luke 12, starting in verse 35, Jesus answered the disciples' question about how and when his ultimate return will be. As we read through it, keep in mind some of the imagery that's used in 1 Thessalonians. Verse 35 of Luke 12. Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning. and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Notice what we have explained here. Jesus is describing servants that are both waiting for and doing the work of their master. They are actively thinking of him and looking for his return, so that when he does, they may welcome him in. But this doesn't sound very thief or unexpected-like, does it? In verses 35 through 38, Jesus describes a situation where people are not caught off guard totally. It's not that they know when he'll return, and it will be a surprise, but they're looking for it. It won't be totally unexpected. But then in verse 39, he says, But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. There's a bit of a shift in the parable here. In verses 35 through 38, the master of the servants is Jesus, and we, of course, are those servants. But in verse 39, the parable is clearly portraying Jesus as the thief, so he can't also be the master of the house in verse 39. It makes no sense. So therefore, we must be the master that's mentioned in verse 39. Jesus is using two different but linked examples to explain the same event. So the question becomes, if we are the servants who are looking for their master to return so that we may open the door for him, notice when he knocks, then how are we also the master of the house who is caught off guard when he returns, since we do not know the day or the hour when he will return? This begins to get at what and who Jesus will come as a thief to. Let's go back to 1 Thessalonians 5 now, and we'll answer this question. Let's have a look again at verses 4 through 6 with Luke 12 now in mind. Verse 4, But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. Okay, so here we have Paul saying that though Jesus will return as a thief in the night, he won't be like a thief to you. You won't be overtaken by it. Is this verse then telling us that by some subtle message that the Christians will know ahead of time of his return? It's just that the world is who won't know. Well, if we think that, then not only are we contradicting other scriptures, including what we just read in Luke 12:40, but we're also not reading the context. A thief may get caught in the act, or he may not get caught. But one thing is for certain, they never announce when they plan to arrive. The unexpectedness of his return is the focal point of the passage, and this applies to everyone. Now, verse 5. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. Here's this imagery of night and day being more fully developed. Being of the day means that we are of those that seek and obey God. We are lights to the world, as we're told in Matthew 5. Those that are of the night do not seek, know, or obey him. It is those that deny him, or at least choose not to believe or know him, to whom Jesus will return as a thief in the night to. Will he return to us as a thief then? Yes, in the sense of it being sudden, or not being able to calculate or know the time of his return. But as we read in Luke 12, it will certainly not be a problem for us when he does return, as we will welcome him. That is, if we stay in the faith and are doing his work. And this is what now Paul gets at in verse 6. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. He, of course, does not mean to never actually go to physical sleep. That would be terrible. But he is describing this spiritually. If we are awake, then we are of the day. Those that are of the day are lights. And those that are lights are those that are doing the work. What is that work? Well, I'll just read this to you. But it says in John 6:29, Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." Earlier in Luke, we read about being awake when the Master comes. Other verses talk about Jesus returning and finding us so doing. This is what those verses are referring to. It is our belief and thus obedience to him, that we are to be so doing. Does God simply want to see that you faithfully kept the Sabbath every Saturday? I mean, yeah, that's important, but it is our good works, our prayers, our faith, and our love for one another that is our belief in him. And it is these things that Jesus should find us doing when he returns. Those that are awake are able and are doing these things. But we might think, if Jesus needs to find me doing these things, I'll just wait to start on them once I get the impression he's about to return. Well, if that were possible, then he wouldn't be coming unexpectedly as a thief then, would he? Therefore, we must be doing these things now since we know to do them. It is in this way that day will not overtake us then like a thief. Though he will return as a thief in the night, if we are awake, and remember what being awake here means, then this day will not overtake us like a thief would. This is what Paul is talking about when he says, you are not of the night, but that you are children of the day. There is something I want to touch on, though, and that is this metaphor of a thief. Is it weird that Jesus is comparing himself to a thief? That is, a sinner, someone whose intent is only to do evil? Is that weird? Is that a problem? At first, I had some difficulty with this because I thought, this just doesn't seem to be consistent with Scripture, of course. But actually, I think there may be a reason for this, after all. At the least, it's something to consider, as it's hard to know if this is really what Jesus means by this or not. Let's have a look, though, at Matthew 25. This is the parable of the talents, as it's called, and this might be part of why Jesus refers to himself as a thief. Because the interesting thing is, though he is coming unexpectedly, like a thief does, he compares himself specifically to that of a thief, to someone whose intent is to steal. A thief in the night is someone who makes a plan to break in. They don't just do it on a whim. He could have said, I'm coming suddenly, at an hour you do not expect, and left it at that, with no mention of being a thief. But he specifically uses the metaphor of a thief, and I think this may be why, or at least could partly be why. We'll break halfway into the parable to the servant that is given 1 talent. And so this is where the master has returned to see what each did with what was given to them. Matthew 25:24. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master had answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think this parable may embody the idea of coming as a thief. In the parable, the master is clearly meant to be Jesus. He gives to each a measure that he expects us to do something with. This servant was given a talent, but did nothing with it, all the while knowing who his master was and what he was about. The servant chose to do nothing with the talent. Therefore, upon his return, the master took back what was his. Actually, he gave it to another that was deserving. And since that servant produced nothing, even what he thought he had, this was also taken away. What did he think he had? Well, all 3 of these individuals are servants with the same master. Just as we belong to Christ, so too did these servants belong to this master. So they were in the truth, as we might say. But the one who did nothing with his talent, what did he hope would happen? Apparently, if he kept the talent safe for his master's return by hiding it, he would have not lost it, but also he wouldn't have to do anything with it. He did not respect his master's wishes or commands. He did not act in the interest of his master with what he had left him to do. To this person, Christ will come as a thief, to take away even what he thought he had, which I think was his person, his physical life, even what he thought he had full control and ownership of. Christ comes as a thief to take even more than he gave from those people that did not value his words or commands. In this case, Christ's intent is to come and take away and plunder the house of those who choose to deny him. Notice in the parable, it's not the world that he does this to, it's the servant of the master. Of course, we all know all the world will not escape either. So just a thought on maybe why Jesus compares himself specifically to that of a thief. All right, to wrap this up, who is Jesus coming as a thief to? To those who choose to ignore the words and teachings of Jesus Christ. Will he come as a thief to us then? Yes, in the sense that we will not know when he will return. It will come on us at a time we do not expect. The difference is we will welcome him, as it will ultimately be a joyous occasion since we are of the day, not of the night. When he is here, he will not be here to take anything from us, but rather give us life and to have us enter into the joy of his kingdom.